Welcome to the Goodman Report podcast. I'm Mark Goodman, principal of Goodman Commercial, a leading force in Vancouver's real estate market. Our firm is proud to be one of the top names in rental apartment buildings, development land, and commercial investment properties. Building on over 4 decades of commitment to advocacy and education, the Goodman Report is here to dive into the world of real estate, exploring the latest trends, market drivers, and insights. And along the way, we'll also introduce you to some of the most influential and fascinating voices shaping the industry. Let's get started. This is the unlikely and riveting story of how a left-wing activist became one of BC's most accomplished business leaders and philanthropists, championing projects in the visual arts and innovation in Canadian wildlife protection and sustainability. Freedom rider, student radical, academic, social activist, residential developer, museum builder, grizzly bear protector. Michael Audain has been all of these things and more in a colorful life spanning 8 decades, 3 continents, and 5 careers. Born to a branch of the legendary BC Dunsmuir clan that had lost its wealth and social status, little was expected of Audain. A lonely teenager plagued by insecurities, he was a dismal failure in the classroom and on the playing field. Yet Audain would become one of the most prominent home builders in British Columbia and a well-known philanthropist in support of the visual arts and wildlife causes. Along the way, Audain did time in a Mississippi prison for participating in the Freedom Rider movement. He started the Nuclear Disarmament Club at the University of British Columbia and was a founder of the BC Civil Liberties Association. He advocated for the Radical Sons of Freedom Doukhobor sect on their protest march from the Kootenays to Vancouver. He proudly displayed a photograph of the communist revolutionary Fidel Castro at the founding convention of the New Democratic Party until Tommy Douglas persuaded him to take it down. Audain worked for an airline in the Arctic, became a probation officer and a farm appraiser, was detained in Ireland under suspicion of terrorism, and sought wisdom from a Buddhist monk in Thailand. In 1980, he took the most unexpected turn of all and became a developer in Greater Vancouver's volatile housing market. As chairman of Polygon Homes, he has been responsible for the construction of over 35,000 homes. Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today. You have lived a very full life, almost 8 decades, and we're here today to hear from you, and I know that you will impart many words of wisdom for me and our listeners, so thank you very much for joining us today. You have experienced a multifaceted life marked by activism, diverse careers, and philanthropy. You also wrote a memoir, One Man in His Time, which I have here with me, and it traces your journey from a challenging childhood to becoming a prominent Canadian home builder, art collector, and conservationist. So I thought I would use your book as a guide for today's podcast to learn more about your life's journey, and perhaps we could start at the beginning. You were born in 1937 in Bournemouth, England, into a branch of the Dunsmuir family, a name we know very well in Vancouver, Dunsmuir Street, to a once wealthy family, Vancouver Island dynasty that had lost its fortune by your time. You describe a turbulent upbringing marked by your father Jimmy's alcoholism and physical abuse, including beatings with a leather slipper or belt. Evacuated from the Channel Islands during World War II, you were sent to boarding school in England and faced isolation and earned the nickname Dumb Wing due to academic and athletic struggles. So, Michael, how did these early challenges influence your diverse and unconventional life path?
It's always hard to tell how one's childhood influences your life path, as you put it. But I think in my case, I went to 11 different schools, so I learned to move around and mix in. When I was at the schools, they were mostly private boarding schools, and during the war, people naturally moved around. People got bombed out, and one thing or another. But I would say my shelter or my retreat from the realities of life, which were sometimes tough for me because I was not distinguished in any way academically or on the sports field. My refuge was really in reading. In fact, I went to one school in Ontario, my last school there, where the headmaster told me I'd read more books taken out more books from the library than any other boy, and he was wondering whether that was just a joke. So he picked up a volume that he had on his desk, and he said, "What about this one? Can you tell me what's in it?" And it happened to be Das Kapital by Karl Marx. So I said, well, okay, I'm very happy. It's going to take probably quite a long time to tell you about the theory of dialectical materialism, but I'm very happy to do that if you want. And he said, no, that's enough. Let's move on.
Wow. So your refuge was really consuming knowledge. Was your
Well, it
escape?
wasn't always knowledge. There were books, juvenile fiction, but books.
Comic books, I understood, were
definitely comic books, whether it was Batman or Gene Autry or whatever. But it was definitely books, to a lesser extent, films. But I was really a bookaholic when I was young.
So you were quite introverted as an adolescent.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So moving on, you returned to Canada and you had what the book describes as a cultural awakening. In 1947, your family returned to Vancouver Island, a pivotal moment you called the most important day of my life. You attended private school in Victoria and Toronto, funded by a family trust. Around 1951, your encounter with Kwakawak carver Mungo Martin sparked a lifelong passion for art, particularly Indigenous art. The book explores your teenage years, your discovery of British Columbia's cultural and natural landscapes, and your growing interest in socialist ideas, inspired by a trip to Mexico to see Diego Rivera's murals. So, Michael, you had this art awakening. How did meeting carver Mungo Martin as a teenager spark your passion for art? And did this encounter set the course for your contributions to the Audain Museum and Canadian art?
Well, I had the opportunity to meet a noted carver, Mungo Martin, when I was around 11 or 12, and I'd been swimming at the Crystal Gardens pool in Victoria. Going home, I noticed Carver working in Thunderbird Park, which is just on the corner near the Parliament buildings, and I stopped and I was curious. I asked the small man who was there carving with one assistant. I said, "Excuse me, could you tell me what you're carving?" And he said, "You tell me what you think it is." And I said, "Well, I think it's a bear, but it's a very strange bear." And he said, "Well, it could be a bear becoming a man, or it could be a man becoming a bear." And from then on, he told me about the theory of in First Nations about the movement between the animal kingdom and the human. But we are really part of the animal kingdom, and sometimes we can transform ourselves into different species, and that was very interesting. At the time, I had no exposure to art of any kind. There was no art in our home. There was no public art gallery in Victoria where I was growing up at that time. And I seem to recall at my school in an art class we had, I got 4 out of 10 for not making my maple leaf realistic enough. So I started to get interested in the art of the Northwest Coast, which is a very rich art form, and that was my introduction really to art. It wasn't European art. It was the wonderful holdings of the Royal BC Museum in the art of the North Coast, which is one of the most sophisticated of any hunter-gatherer group in the world. And I was fortunate to be able to spend many hours in the museum before I ever saw any so-called Canadian art or any paintings.
Amazing how just by happenstance this may have led you down a path that otherwise you wouldn't have experienced.
Yes.
Later on in the book, there are several chapters that document your early activism during your university years. At the University of British Columbia in the late 1950s, you became quite politically active. You founded the Nuclear Disarmament Club in 1961 and was a delegate at the New Democratic Party, also known as the NDP, founding convention, where you displayed a Fidel Castro photograph until Tommy Douglas advised its removal. Your studies earned you a BA in 1962, a Bachelor of Social Work in 1963, and a Master's in Social Work in 1965, alongside your growing commitment to civil liberties and social justice. So, Michael, how do these passions now weave into your work?
Well, I still take an interest in what's going on in the world, and through the foundation, my family foundation, we do quite a bit in terms of supporting cultural activities, most particularly visual art, but also conservation and research in the nature and that sort of thing. And I've long had an interest in that, as do my grandchildren.
Amazing. Well, I've been to your office several times over the last couple decades, and I always admire. It's like walking into a museum. So clearly, your passion for art and culture does weave into your everyday workspace as well. Perhaps we needed you to help negotiate some nuclear disarmament. And over the last couple of weeks, Michael, where were you?
Well, in the 1950s, there was a great interest in having a peace movement because the experts were telling us it was almost inevitable that we were going to have a atomic war with the Soviet Union, and so we did a lot of preparation. We had exercises in the schools in British Columbia. My father actually worked in the civil defense in Victoria, and so there was just a lot of concern about we were living under this nuclear umbrella. We were also interested in and very shocked about reading the results of the bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so some of us started to feel we should do something about it. We were very opposed to Canada accepting nuclear weapons, which was suggested and considered at one time by the government. And so when I was at the University of BC, my colleagues formed something called the Nuclear Disarmament Club. We organized probably the biggest peace march that had occurred in Vancouver since the marches of the 1930s. Yeah, and I was an editor of a publication called Our Generation Against Nuclear War, which was based in Montreal, and that was a time of confrontation to some extent with the authorities. I remember at the Comox Air Force Base sitting in the entry, trying to block the entry to the base and other things. But that was a time in our history, and fortunately, I think the government got the message, and we still don't have nuclear weapons, to my knowledge, on Canadian soil today.
Moving on, the book talks about Freedom Rider and civil rights. In 1961, you joined the Freedom Rider movement in the United States, challenging segregation laws. Your act of sitting at a blacks-only lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi, led to a 4-month sentence in Mississippi State Penitentiary. Your memoir details your experience in the American South, the harsh realities of jail, and how this period shaped your activism, including a later role as a founder of the BC Civil Liberties Association. Michael, can you share a defining moment from the experience in jail as a freedom rider and how it influenced your lifelong commitment to civil liberties?
I think I had an interest in civil liberties before I ended up in jail in Mississippi. Otherwise, I don't think that would have happened. But it was a long, hot summer, and I didn't go to Mississippi just on all the way from British Columbia, just on a whim. I happened to be doing some research for a school paper in Memphis, Tennessee, and all this was starting to go along happening when I was down there. And I thought that I should test the commitment of the United States government to integration of interstate transportation. So I purchased a bus ticket from on Greyhound from Memphis to New Orleans, and the bus happened to stop at in Jackson, Mississippi, for a dinner break, and I had the choice of going into the black restaurant in the airport. I think it was called Colored, or going into the white section. And because I was traveling on the bus with a bunch of black people with whom I'd struck up a conversation, I followed them into the black section and then was arrested for breaking their rules, but whatever they had down there.
What was it like in jail? It was 4 months. Were you in a single cell or with a group of other inmates?
I was initially in the city jail in Jackson, and then for 2 or 3 days, then we were, so many of us, we were transferred to the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, and down there it was pretty tough, and we were two to a cell down there, and it was a very tough regime. I was only there for about a month. After a number of weeks, the Freedom Riders started coming out on appeal bonds, and most of the appeals went eventually to the United States Supreme Court, where the sentences were revoked, I guess.
Yeah. So you were in your early 20s at this time?
I was, yes.
So continuing on, there's another few chapters in the book that summarizes the social work and the diverse careers that you've gone through. You worked as a juvenile probation officer and social worker in Vancouver's East Side, witnessing housing challenges that influenced your later career. You've also held varied jobs, such as a commercial pilot in the Arctic in 1957, a farm appraiser, and a housing policy consultant for the NDP. The book highlights your eclectic career path, driven by a lack of a business plan and a desire to address social issues through practical work. You've said, quote, "My life never had a business plan." Clearly, you've embraced unplanned twists that have shaped your career and personal growth. What key insights about the region's social and housing issues did these experiences reveal? And how did they shape your understanding and approach to urban development? You know, Michael, before you answer, I never thought that you would be a supporter of the NDP. When I grew up as a kid, NDP was a 4-letter word in my household.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, well, I had the benefit of friendship with Premier Dave Barrett, who became the first NDP Premier of British Columbia in 1972. And I would say a week after he became Premier, I received a telephone call from him in Ottawa, where I was working for the Canadian Council on Social Development. And he asked me to come back to the coast and live in Victoria and create a housing ministry, because there was nothing of that type at the time. So I kind of did that. I found that I didn't feel comfortable going back to Victoria to live. So I commuted at least 4 days a week by seaplane over to Victoria. I didn't get the title of deputy minister, but I got the same pay. And I set up the housing component of the BC government, which today is called BC Housing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I developed an interest in housing when I was given a fieldwork placement in the Strathcona area of Vancouver. And I encountered the first, I guess it was the second public housing project built in Vancouver. It was called McLean Park. I found that very interesting, and I got to know some of the families living there, and some of the senior citizens who were in the apartments at the time, and I was thinking, well, that would be a good way to improve housing conditions in very blighted areas of the city. So I became interested in that, and I went then to the eventually to the London School of Economics, where I signed up for a doctoral program in housing. I studied housing all over Europe. Then instead of finishing my thesis, I got hired by the Ontario Housing Corporation in Toronto to advise them on a very vigorous program that they were involved in, and then I kind of did the same thing when I came out to BC, and so most of my interest was in the social housing and co-op housing, particularly, rather than the private market.
Well, speaking of studying at the London School of Economics, I wanted to talk about some of your international experiences and where you suggested you went through some ideological shifts. So that was in 1968. I understand you were at the London School of Economics, but you left to join student protests in London and Paris, inspired by figures like Daniel Cohn-Bendit, also known as Danny the Red. Disillusioned by the failure of French idealism, you returned to Canada in 1969, abandoning your unfinished PhD thesis, and you were detained in Ireland under suspicion of terrorism and sought wisdom from a Buddhist monk in Thailand. So Michael, from protesting in Paris to seeking wisdom from a Buddhist monk in Thailand, your travels are, let's say, eclectic. Which international experience left the deepest mark on your worldview? Or, how did your global adventures impact your ideological evolution?
Well, my ideological evolution, or as you kindly put it, was very gradual. And I did identify with the Canadian socialism in the 1960s, and I met a lot of wonderful people in that regard. It wasn't until I started working with the provincial government in the early 1970s, working for Premier Dave Barrett, that he told me to get a lot of housing built, and I knew how to get it financed, 90% by the federal government through CMHC, because I'd used that route in Toronto. But then I had, how was that to get built? And I decided to have a chat with some of the private developers, the larger firms in Vancouver, particularly Jack Poole of Audain Development and Elvin Nayrod, who was a major developer. And they showed me how they could do it, and I think in many ways more efficiently than just buying a piece of land and then hiring architects. They had all this housing that was sort of in the pipeline, and we were able to get that financed and on a very reasonable basis, and get it built in a relatively short time. So up to that time, I had a very dim view about private developers, and I include anyone making money off real estate in that thing. My first two houses, which I acquired, nothing down, was my first house in Toronto. I paid $24,000 for it. When I sold, and then I bought a house later in Ottawa after I moved there. In both cases, when I sold them, I just put a sign out front, housing for sale, a house for sale, and I listed didn't list it, I just agreed to sell it at the same price that I bought for it, because I didn't think I should speculate from my own housing. And
But you didn't want to make a profit.
I didn't want to make a profit, and you're surprised. It didn't take weeks or days. It took only hours to sell those homes. You should try it sometime.
Michael, I don't think that would work for my business model, nor do I think it works for Polygon's current business model.
That's right.
But quite idealistic. Well, that's actually a good segue to talk about your transition to business. In 1980, I understand you made the unexpected shift to real estate and joining Polygon Homes in Vancouver's volatile housing market. As chairman, you have overseen the construction of over 30,000 homes. And this period in your life marks a transition from socialist ideals to business leadership, navigating the complexities of capitalism while maintaining your social conscience. So, Michael, you moving from a socialist activist to a leading real estate tycoon, for lack of better words, seems like a dramatic shift. What do you think prompted this change, and how do you reconcile it with your earlier ideals?
Well, I was impressed with the people I met in the development industry, they didn't all seem the crooks that I thought they were. And I kind of got to know them on a social basis, and I was impressed with how they could, the drive they had, how they were able to get things done, and people I met were all highly ethical, and I initially, though, when I founded Polygon Homes, my intention was only to work with NGOs and co-ops and build social housing. That was my original intention, and that went on actually for 3 or 4 years. And it was only when the funds for social housing started to be reduced by the federal government that I started to think, well, I've got quite all these staff working for me. How do I keep them busy? And we started to learn to do housing for the private market. And so today we build everything from single-family homes to low-rise apartments to high-rise apartments and townhomes, of course, everything in between. And we operate in about 16 municipalities in the Lower Mainland. And you mentioned the number of homes that we've built. I think we've completed by now, it's about 35,000 homes. And we'd like to build, obviously, a lot more because there's a huge need.
It's certainly amazing how many homes you've actually built. I wanted to continue along this theme and a little bit more about Polygon. Polygon is often described playfully as a machine. There is a sense that in up or down markets, you have to keep churning out homes. Is there a conscious decision to operate that way, keeping staff busy and revenue coming in even when others might push pause? How do you keep positive and moving forward in markets like today, where all we seem to be hearing is negative headlines?
Well, we frankly enjoy building homes, and we do need to keep busy. I know the home building industry tends to be very cyclical, but I think as long as there is a need for housing, and there's a tremendous need in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia, we'll keep going. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, like in today's market, we have to perhaps de-emphasize the high-rise component of what we're doing, but in the town home and the low-rise apartment part of our what we do, it was still good take-up, and it varies, but there seems to be an appetite, and it may be a period when we're not making much money. In fact, we're selling homes today, and in many cases below cost. But we do need to keep going, and because we've got a whole inventory of land, and we need to move ahead. Many of our communities are multi-phase, so if we don't make any money on the first phase or two, we hope we'll by the end of it we'll be profitable again. So with the support of our banks, and we have relationships with pretty well all the major banks, we will continue to build in this period. And I'm also confident that the market will grow stronger again. I can't tell you when, but it's been my experience. We go through periods of oversupply, and then pretty soon we're back to prices moving up, and we'll do well. One thing, of course, I tell my staff, and I have found, and I've studied this over many years, that I advise them to go and buy the best home that they can, or the best home that they can afford. And I can almost guarantee them that if they own that home for 5 years, they won't lose money. Obviously, if they just buy it and then try to sell in 2 years, the market could be lower. But if they own it for 5 years, you're not going to lose money in Greater Vancouver. And that's something I've observed over probably over 60 years.
There may be an exception, though, if you bought in 2016, 2017, wanting to sell today. Been a pronounced dip.
I'm not aware of that because 8 years ago we were selling at much lower prices than we've been selling
in
recently.
The investment proprities I bought, I probably paid too much, Michael.
Yeah, well, maybe
I should have bought a Polygon home.
maybe in your case, but I think it still what I said still pertains.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about your leadership style. I've had the privilege of conducting several transactions with your firm over 2 decades, and before my time, my father, David. And one of the impressions that has always left on me is professionalism, sense of pride in your product. And when negotiating, if the property was under contract, it was pretty much good as gold. You would close on the deal. Very little subterfuge, no last minute grinds. There's a culture of professionalism. And I always found that your firm to be very ethical, and that culture permeates throughout your business dealings. But at the same time, there's also a sense that you're a tough leader and that you have high demands on your staff. How would you characterize your leadership and your philosophy in business?
Well, I've never thought about that really, but first I'd like to say how much I valued the relationship we've had with your father over a long time. I've been a great admirer of his, and of course, given my interest in art, the tremendous contribution that your mother has made to the art of our country. So I really admire that. But yeah, I think we try to be straight shooters. Fortunately, we are well financed, and so we don't. We generally don't need to. Once we've made a deal, the thing goes pretty smoothly. So that's a big part of it. I've always made a point of looking after our bankers. I've never caused any bank to lose money on any deal that we've done, and I've never caused any investor to lose money. And that's why, in most cases, we don't take investors. Into our deals, we're not open for that because I don't want anyone to lose money. And if they did, I'd have to make it good in some way. I think that we're pretty boring people. We just show up to work and get the job done. And I think something about Polygon, I strongly believe we're very much a family company. Our people are they don't travel widely up and down the West Coast or going back east. Everyone's with their families on weekends. And they're all involved in their children's sports and different community activities. Everyone's involved in that, and I think we're maybe a bit boring, but at the same time, we're there for the long term. I see people coming in quite often from Asia, and they come and do one or two projects, and if they don't work out, they go back to Singapore or China or wherever it is with their tail between their legs. And that's not something that we do. We're here for the long term, and our management has been with us for a great many years, and we're very fortunate in that regard.
Well, I can say unequivocally, probably one of the most admired brands in the city, and it's been a pleasure doing deals with your company and your staff, and I hope we can do many more.
Oh, let's do more.
Okay. I wanted to move a bit now to the philanthropy and your art patronage. Clearly, you have a passion for art, especially Indigenous and Canadian works, led to significant contributions, including founding the Audain Art Museum in Whistler, which I have visited many times. Your $100 million donation to the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2021 is a highlight. The book covers your art collection, including pieces by Diego Rivera and Jean-Paul Riopel, and your efforts to elevate Canadian artists. Focusing on Indigenous art to start, your support has been a cornerstone of your legacy. How did your perspective on Indigenous culture evolve?
I encountered the art of the Northwest Coast, which internationally is considered amongst the most sophisticated of any Indigenous art. I counted that as a child, and I've always enjoyed it. And I've tried to learn as much as I can about the art of the different nations up and down the BC coast. And I've been fortunate. I've met a great many very skilled artists, and also been able to collect quite a bit of their work. I think if you're interested in the art of British Columbia, it obviously has to start with the art of the First Nations, which is absolutely exemplary.
Do you have any art of Bill Reid?
Yes, I do. I've had some work that I've donated to our museum in Whistler.
Yeah.
Actually, I have the model for the canoe that he carved to go to paddle up the Seine at the time of Expo, and I have I think it's about a 10 or 12 foot canoe in my home that he carved and painted. So I knew Bill Reid, and he taught me some things too, and I enjoyed that.
And Emily Carr, do you own some of her work?
We have one of the largest collections of Emily Carr. I think it's the second or third best collection in Canada in our museum in Whistler. So certainly, growing up in Victoria, I couldn't help but acquire that amazing artist's work. So.
And Jean-Paul Riopel, another artist that your memoir dedicates significant space to. Why is his work important to you, and what do you feel our listeners should take away from that?
Well, Jean-Paul Riopel is internationally Canada's best-known artist. Within Canada, everyone knows Emily Carr, but internationally, they know us for Jean-Paul Riopel. He represented Canada at least two of the Venice Biennales. He's very, very much respected in France, where he lived for many years. I encountered him at his art, I should say, at the age of 15 or 16 in Ontario. I think we had to go another 50 or maybe 60 years before I could afford to buy one of his works. But I remember it from as a teenager.
Was it always that abstract that we see today that he's known for?
Yes, it was. I asked when I saw it. I said, "What? That is amazing artwork." And I asked the school teacher I was with. I said, "What is that?" And I was told that's abstract art. I'd never seen work of abstract. Strangely enough, Riopel himself said he never created one abstract painting in his life. He didn't call it abstract. His explanation was abstract means to kind of take away and whereas he said when he was involved with nature, because his paintings really focus on two things. One is his love and interest in nature, and the other is energy. It's pure energy you'll see in his works. He said, though, that he claimed that his work, he would go into nature more than any other artist before him. And so he said that what you see is my explorations within nature, not abstracting it in any way. Complicated, but it made sense to me.
And for listeners to understand, the Canadian art scene is growing on an international stage. What would a Riopel oil canvas sell for today?
Well, you can't generalize. It depends on the size. It depends on the year. I think the top price is about $7 or $8 million. But interestingly, the prices that his girlfriend, Joan Mitchell, American lady, but he lived with in Paris for a long time, her prices would be, say, $30 to $40 million in U.S. dollars too, not Northern pesos. So Riopel's market's mainly Canadian and European.
I remember many, many years ago, we listed and sold a project for you in the district of North Van. And before the meeting started, I was there with my father. We were talking about art. There was a recent art auction. And you said to me, and I remember that you said, in my lifetime, we will likely see a $1 billion art sale. I remember this. So I've been watching the Sotheby's and the Phillips art auctions, and we're not quite there yet. But
I've heard of, I think I've heard of 400 million, haven't
that's
I?
right. Yeah.
You know, and I think there was a Leonardo.
Yeah, Monday.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
It could be, I've heard it's a fraud, but we'll see.
Oh, I hope not. Yeah.
I wanted to move into your commitment to wildlife, Michael, particularly grizzly bear protection. It's been a key theme in your book. And you explore your environmental philanthropy, including support for conservation initiatives. And this reflects your broader impact as an officer of the Order of Canada and a member of the Order of British Columbia. You've donated significantly to the Vancouver Art Gallery and wildlife causes. What would you say drives your philanthropy? And how do you choose where to focus your efforts?
Well, what drives my philanthropy, as you call it, is really just my interests, and I have the privilege of being able to financially support things that I'm interested in. I'm certainly very interested in our grizzly bear brothers and sisters and their welfare in British Columbia. I learned at an early age that if the bears are well, and because they're called a keystone species, if they're well and if they're thriving, then the general environment is good. In other words, there's berries for them to eat. There's fish in the streams for them in the fall to eat, to gain, and they are marvelous animals. Grizzly bears, they're they can eat practically anything, and they're very ancient animals, and they're very intelligent. And I know that a lot of people are frightened of them, and encountering them in the wrong place or surprising them is certainly not a good idea, but they're fascinating to me. And I think that, we've obviously played a role in stopping the trophy hunt for grizzly bears in British Columbia. And now I'd like to see us play that role in the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, and maybe even Alaska, where Alaska has a great many bears, but they also have a huge number of hunters coming in from the United States. But I think we should let the grizzly bears alone and provide enough land for them to have their own species, and they're remarkable animals. And so you can imagine how infatuated I've been with them in my life since I first encountered them.
I've had some close encounters with grizzly bears. I hiked Stein Valley many years ago on school trips, and then later with friends. And we were hiking up on the Alpine. And my last trip in my mid-20s, or my early 20s, I was hiking with a friend of mine, and it was just the two of us. And we got into some argument. I can't remember what, but we were on the Alpine. And when we were hiking, the bears would mark their territory with their claws on a tree. So we would see that. And we knew that we had to be loud. We had whistles. We had a protocol in the event a bear was coming. We would shield ourselves. We had pepper spray. We were organized. But for whatever reason, we got into an argument, and
Was the argument with some bear?
No,
it
wasn't. But we separated in a huff. We called each other names, and I went on my way, and he went on his. But you can imagine we're up on the Alpine 2 or 3 days from any road access. And the mistake that we made was that, number one, we got into an argument on the Alpine in bear territory. But secondly, I had all the food in my bag, and he had all the equipment for tents, and it was freezing up there. And then I saw some bears, and I can tell you, Michael, I was scared. We got separated for a couple hours, and I thought, oh, geez, I'm going to freeze. I got no sleeping bag, no tent, and he's got no food. And we finally found each other a few hours later and hugged it out. And but the bears were walking around, and I could see them, and I was terrified.
Yeah, well, the one thing we all have to remember is that human beings are not prey for grizzly bears. But at the same time, just like all the other species in the animal kingdom in British Columbia, you have to respect them. And if a bear, you're going into their territory. So if you encounter a bear on the trail, it's you who moves off, not
That's right.
the bear.
That's right. And you're a guest in their home.
Exactly. And now, of course, if you have attractants like free food, they I'm sure they would enjoy that. But I think there are precautions. Certainly, going in a group would be one of them. But I've had the benefit of knowing and quite a number of grizzly bear guides, and I've done some of the I've been out in the bush a bit myself too. It's fascinating, the stories they have, and the bears are very intelligent animals, and so I could tell you some stories about bears in the Northwest Territories when I was about 19 years old, but I'll save that for some other time.
For our next podcast.
That's right.
A few more questions for you. In the final chapters of your book, you reflect on your legacy and your personal encounters. One of them was a memorable meeting with Queen Elizabeth. And I wanted to hear a little bit what it was like to meet the Queen.
Well, it was amazing. I think in common with the millions of other people who had an opportunity to meet her, the one thing comes through right away is that the Queen has a very good sense of humor, and so she'll make you laugh, and or you can make her laugh, and so I think that's what I realized. And I had the fortune of sitting next to her at a hockey game in Vancouver.
That's amazing.
For a while, and
who was she cheering for?
Well, naturally the local team, and it was very, very funny, and I could tell you one or two things she said, but I don't think I can repeat them on the air. So I don't think I could do that. You're
in a safe space here, Michael. No restrictions. I want to talk to you about, maybe you could impart some advice and words of wisdom to the listeners, many of whom are in the real estate business, be it developers, realtors, mortgage brokers, stakeholders in the industry. And as you know, we're going through a very difficult time now. I've never experienced a cycle like this. This summer will be my 23rd year in the real estate business. I recently went for lunch with my father, who has a few more decades. And, he's seen many cycles. And he reminded me in the 90s, interest rates rose past 20%. And I said, yeah, but Dad, that was a doubling of interest rates. We went through 4 or 5 time increase, albeit it's a low interest rate, and it's come off a little bit. But it's really been a shock to the system. I have 4 court-ordered sales, a couple more coming now. Land has dropped about 50% in the city and Broadway plan. Developers are going broke, shelving projects. Prices are dropping. And we know Rennie made a very big announcement that they've laid off about 1/3 of their staff. Bo Jarvis of West Group announced that he had to make a very difficult decision to lay off staff. Mosaic Homes has laid off staff. My colleagues in other brokerages are having trouble right now because of lack of liquidity in transactions. We're a transactional-based business. How are you doing? And any advice? How do we face these headwinds?
Well, we're going through a slow period like everyone else. And I don't think it's as bad as the period that we experienced in the early 1980s. That's when interest rates went up to 19-20%, if you can imagine. So it's not, this is more, I think, a kind of manufactured period. It's a loss of confidence and people are unsure of what's happening and their job in the future and their place in the world. There's a lot of the international level, a lot of uncertainty. So people aren't going to make the biggest investment decision in their lives, which is to go out and buy a home. they'll say mañana. They'll wait and see what happens. So that's really what's going on right now. There's a tremendous interest in real estate and in our town, and I'm convinced that the market will come back, but at the present time, so I know it's difficult for a lot of people, and interestingly, rents are going down quite a bit, particularly is making it tough for people who built under these programs which promote rental housing, and because they're not getting anything like the rents that they expected on their loan documents and original pro formas. So it's a difficult time, but I think we'll come through it. I think it's good now. We've got a very capable new prime minister. He doesn't have a majority government, but I think that's good. I think the administration, Victoria, I think they're very experienced. I think they're, obviously a lot of bright people there, and I think they'll figure out at least, if not how to hurt the market, maybe, but just if they can refrain from doing anything more to hurt the market, that would be good. And I think it's an opportunity for NGOs and housing co-ops and that to go out and buy some buildings right now.
Couldn't be a better time in the market.
I think it's a great time to buy, and that's what I tell people in our company. I said, if you can afford it, to go out and buy the best home that you can, and I guarantee you that in 5 years you will be very pleased that you'd done that, and so it's that's the situation, and I understand it's hard when people lose their job, and we do need so many people. The housing industry needs a lot of good people, but it's tough because the reason why a lot of homes are not being built because the figures don't make sense for those of us in the development industry. The price of not only of construction, but the cost, all the other costs and imposts that government is imposing on us, it just doesn't leave any room for a profit margin, and so in most cases,
profit's important to you now.
Yeah, well, I think
makes the world go around.
I think, it helps a lot of our staff, and there's a lot of people work in the urban development industry, and I do think there's a need for investors to get a return on their investment, and I particularly maybe a bit off the topic, but I believe this is a great opportunity for government to modify their rent control program right now, particularly at the upper range of the market. I don't see any point having rent control at the upper range because there's no way that, in this situation, most cases rents can't be raised. So I think some gradual relaxation of the BC rent control measures would be very helpful. Otherwise, I don't know why people would invest in rental housing when you're so much subject to government control.
Michael, you should write for the Goodman Report. I think you have a lot of credibility, and I hope, our policy leaders are listening to you. And I think if anybody has credibility, it's you, being a former member of the NDP, advocate.
Well, I'm not a member of any other party, and I support everyone who, wants to be involved in public service. It doesn't matter what political stripe. So,
I have one last question for you, Michael. Looking back, what do you hope your legacy will be, not just in business or art, but as a person in his time?
Well, I don't really think in terms of legacies. Every morning, despite my age, I get up and stretch my legs and say, "Gee, I'm still here. I've got lots to do today," and so I don't really go around thinking about my legacy. I'm more interested in getting things done, and like I have a shopping list of things that I would like to accomplish, and so that's what interests me and keeps me going. And above all, as a kid who knocked around, I went to 11 different schools. I went to 5 universities, come to think of it. And I've lived in many parts of the world, and I had a pretty rocky start in life. I just feel I'm very blessed to live in our wonderful province of British Columbia, and so I just feel so fortunate that I've lived here and had that experience.
Well, thank you very much for coming in to speak with me today. And we're very fortunate to have you as a philanthropist and business leader and conservationist. I've learned a lot today. And Michael, try to stay out of jail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for tuning in to the Goodman Report podcast. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at goodmanreport.com for the latest listings, market research, statistics, and industry news. Follow us on X and Instagram at Goodman Report, on Facebook at Goodman Commercial, and on LinkedIn under my name, Mark Goodman. On behalf of the entire Goodman team, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time. This podcast is produced by Podfather Creative.